we're here to honor Dwayne Hunn, who is just visiting from California to promote and lobby on Capitol Hill and with the Peace Corps and at the World Beyond War Conference to promote his idea about national service and an American World Service Corporation or project that will vastly increase the amount of public service opportunities there are for young people to get out of their impoverished situation without having to go to war, for example.
And we all form a team to help each other through emergencies. You are on that team. So is your family, each member of it. And in your community, every doctor, fireman, every policeman and nurse, every lineman and operator, every civil defense worker, in fact, every community employee is ready to help you if you need him. So your community is prepared for emergencies and ready to help other communities.
With no further ado, I'll let Dwayne Hunn get up here.
My name is Dwayne Hunn. I'm the Executive Director of People's Lobby, and we have a piece of legislation called the American World Service Corps National Service Proposal. What it would do, it would ramp up by about 150,000 Americans a year, per year for 7 years, till you get to that number 1 million. Then it says we're going to keep these 1 million National Service Corps volunteers in business for at least 20 years before you consider sunsetting the legislation. That means over 28 years you'd have about 21 million Americans who would have served. Now, it's not a brand new big organization. It's not a bureaucracy. It's not something in competition with the Peace Corps, and it's not just the Peace Corps. This would be a small umbrella agency that would shuttle volunteers to those organizations that they chose and were accepted to serve in, such as Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, Habitat, Doctors Without Borders, Head Start, Red Cross, International Rescue, Oxfam, Mercy Corps, State Conservation Corps, in-need schools, schools in Appalachia that need tutors, physical therapy centers that are short on physical therapists when your mother or father has a stroke and they're trying to recover. So all of those agencies in America and abroad that could use help, the refugee rebuilding in Palestine, if we had a standing corps that was ready to do that and it was $1 million a year, do you think that might make Russia say, America's getting too much goodwill on this? And if those places that ask for more Peace Corps volunteers, instead of the Peace Corps begging for a little increase in their budget so they can move from 7,700 Peace Corps volunteers a year to 20, 30, 40, and 100 and 200,000, which is what John Kennedy wanted the Peace Corps to hit very quickly. He wanted it to go to 100,000 very quickly, and then he said when it hits 1 million, it'll be significant.
The Peace Corps is really the idea of the American people. When I talked last fall about the idea of young American men and women going abroad to serve shoulder to shoulder with the citizens of newly emerging countries, a tremendous response went up from the schools and colleges of the United States. In the last few months, more applications for the Peace Corps have come to us than have come for positions in all the rest of the United States government put together. What is remarkable is that there is no salary for the members of the Peace Corps. They will go abroad and live on the same standard as people of other countries, but they will work with them 2 or 3 years, devoting part of their lives to peace and to strengthening the ties that bind men together all over the globe.
There are barely 220,000 returned Peace Corps volunteers. I'm one of them. I served when it was 15, 16,000. That's the largest it got. That's when we were in places like the slums in India. We were in Iran. We were in Iraq. And we were starting to build up in Africa. Now, everybody in this room probably has 3 good ideas on what should become law. And the reason we do it this way, People's Lobby used to do it through the initiative process. We passed initiative process legislation in California because our founders, Ed and Joyce Cooper, would say, if you want to change the country, write its laws. That's what we did in California. We wrote the Political Reform Act, which got 70% of the vote at the time. It was a record for California. And then with Ralph Nader asking us to, we ran the Western Bloc campaign, which ran 16 states, Western Bloc states that all had the initiative process. And even though big oil, big auto, all the biggies came out against us with full-page ads, and we couldn't afford it, we'd be talking to groups like this, and the full-page ads and the television ads scared people. All of our races were close, and we raised the public policy IQ of Americans dramatically so that not one new nuclear power plant was built until George Bush II. So the country got smarter on nuclear power. Now, if we had by now 20 or 30 or 40 million returned volunteers, do you think the country would be smarter? Do you think if we had that many volunteers, the kind of thing that Kennedy wanted with the Peace Corps and Vista, do you think that maybe somebody would have served at home? We might have missed a $7 trillion war or two. Now, everybody, again, as I said, has a good idea, and they ought to make a law out of it. But the thing is, how do you get enough money to run the law? Or to get a couple Republicans to move over and say, this is something we support. Republicans like to see you serve your country. So we're saying if you serve your country, you National Service volunteer through the Peace Corps or any of those groups or some local nonprofit that does good things, then we're going to give you 2 years of community college tuition plus 2 years of state college tuition. We used to have that number in the bill at 16,000, 17,000. Now I've raised it to 23,000. 23,000, and then when we look at these groups, the most expensive group probably per volunteer, if you take their budget and divide it by 7,700, the number of roughly of Peace Corps volunteers this year, divide that into the budget, it comes out to like $51,000. That's the most expensive group out of that list of names that I just gave you. So you add 51 to 23, that's about $74,000. How much of the Forbes 400, what amount of the Forbes 400 value do you think it would take for them to annually donate willingly to underwrite the cost of an escrowed American World Service Corps account? Escrowed account means it could only be spent on the volunteer stipend, the volunteer's college education if he wanted her vocational training, or that $23,000 as a home down payment, or some other use that's beneficial. And if I did it and I didn't need the education, I'm dumb enough, and if I didn't want it or need it, I could give it to my niece, nephew, or grandson, just like they do with the GI Bill. They can assign the GI Bill. What we're trying to do is do some things that the GI Bill does for the GIs, but much more cheaply. But give America an alternative. You have 1.4 million active military, 1 million active reserve, and now we're saying, why don't you have a 1 million force army that does peaceful, productive building at home and abroad? And when you have a Katrina that hits the southern states and wipes somebody out, and you have all these additional AmeriCorps workers and Habitat workers throughout America and the country, you just send them to Katrina. You give them 2,000 a day additional volunteers, and you rebuild that torn up community and rebuild those houses much more quickly. So what we've done, in addition to the progressive tax revenue generators in the bill, like a financial tax and an excise tax and an estate tax, which other progressive groups try to use, what we've done is say we're going to take that list from the Forbes 400, and everybody knows how liberal the Forbes 400 is, and we calculate, we add a column to that. Now in 1988, the number one person on the Forbes 400 was, anybody want to guess?
Gates.
Nope. In 1988, it was a guy who has the big warehouse store, Sam Walton. his value was about 6.8 billion. Today, who's number one? Gates, about 72.6 billion, more than 10 times as much. The middleman in 1988 was about 550 million. Is that my right? Yeah, that was right. You know, it's 10 times that today. Back then it was like 210 million. It's 10 times, more than 10 times that today, 2.134 trillion. So I know all of your incomes have gone up at the same astronomical pace. Mine has too. So I don't mind giving 0.6/10,000%. I've dedicated myself to giving 0.6/10,000% of my income this year to underwrite the cost of the American World Service Corps. Would all you do that? Well, in that case, your favorite beer, Black and Tan, is that right? Eugling is number 400 on this list. You know what he'd have to give every year for the next 28 years to fund 21 million Americans for 28 years? Someone want to guess? Somebody I told already. If all the other 400 gave, they'd all have to give 0.6/10,000%. Eugling's 0.6/10,000% is $104,000. You think he can? You probably drink that much here. So that's the non-traditional funding mechanism. We also have other spreadsheets that we want to make public if this happens. One is the top celebs, the top jocks, you know, 28 million for throwing a hard ball. The top celebrities, and those corporations who have paid little or nothing in taxes, and philanthropical organizations. So it would probably take very little from the Forbes 400. When I speak to Rotary groups about this, the only thing that upsets them is what I've just mentioned to you. And when two of the guys in one Rotary meeting complained about it, the others said, well, why are you so upset? And he says, because it embarrasses the rich people. They're not required to pay a tax. We're just asking them to voluntarily donate. But if those Waltons, who make up 6 of the top 15, the Sam Walton's children or grandchildren, whatever they are, if they don't want to give, then maybe some of these people will stop saying, look, I got 2 sons, or I got a son and a daughter. They want to go to college. They can't afford college, but they're willing to serve their country in a capacity such as national service. And if they do, I can afford college because the kid's getting some of his tuition or all of it paid. So if they don't do that, there is a public embarrassment, but with Ralph Nader writing his book, Only the Super Rich Can Save Us, and it's his only novel. How many have read it? Anybody in here read it? Just George and a couple others. I've read all but the last 30 pages because it's 760 pages long and you'd spend a lot of dinners reading that thing. So
Nader said it was the most important book he'd ever written.
George says Nader says it's the most important book he's ever written. But you got that psychology going on. You got Gates and Buffett giving the giving pledge, and you got 150 billionaires that are pledging to do it. We're trying to get in touch with somebody like Buffett. Nader's office says he doesn't think Gates will reply positively because they tried to take down his big conglomerate kind of thing, and they got in trouble. They made him angry. But Buffett is the guy that his book revolves around. Only the Super Rich Can Save Us. It's like Buffett pulling together his billionaire buddies and saying, we got to do something to save the country. Let's fund some of these do-good organizations that are trying to change the world.
Yes, we have the equipment and the people for an effective team. But, like any team, it can win only when everyone knows his job and does it well. What is your job?
Here is a word from our sponsor.